A grab for oil leads to an assassination attempt in 35 minutes. George Clooney and Matt Damon star in Syriana. It's after the latest ITV news at 10.
MI6's cosy relationship with Gaddafi, Cameron says damaging allegations must be investigated. Documents found in Tripoli suggest British intelligence rendered terror suspects to Libya. Now the question, did Britain turn a blind eye to torture?
They knew they were sending people back to Libya to be tortured.
This is the ITV News at 10 with Mark Austin and Mary Nightingale.
One of the alleged terrorists is now a leading figure in the rebel movement that toppled Gaddafi with Britain's help. Tonight, the government says it's already re-establishing a diplomatic mission in Tripoli. Also on the programme, a choppy outlook for Britain's service sector as new figures heighten fears of a double-dip recession.
Africa's worsening famine. Aid agencies warn that 750,000 Somalis could die.
In the battle over England's green and pleasant land, the government defends controversial changes to the planning system.
Good evening. A judge is to examine whether MI6 shared intelligence with Colonel Gaddafi's security forces, some of which may have been extracted by torture. The Prime Minister made the announcement this afternoon. The claims relate to papers found in the abandoned office of Gaddafi's intelligence chief. They are said to show that British spies colluded with the seizure of Gaddafi opponents abroad and their return to Libya for interrogation. Our political editor, Tom Bradby, reports.
When a regime crumbles, it is not just its overlords who are in trouble. They leave behind them a paper trail, and in that trail lies sometimes uncomfortable truths about who they did business with. In the case of Libya, that means us, or at least our intelligence services, and the intense chumminess of some of the exchanges makes for uncomfortable reading. The allegation is that we helped render men like Abdul Hakim Belhaj, who was allegedly arrested in Bangkok and sent to Libya by the CIA with our help. He now turns out to be the new rebel military commander for Tripoli, so if true, it would not only be morally questionable, but incredibly stupid too. It was also alleged a man called Abu Muntir was sent to Libya after being detained in Hong Kong. His fate remains unknown. We were certainly close to Musa Kusa, Gaddafi's former intelligence chief, who defected last March on a flight organised by MI6. David Cameron could have chosen to lay into Labour about all this today, but he knows that on this subject it is a brave politician who casts the first stone.
And the accusation is that after Libya came in from the cold and gave up the weapons of mass destruction, the relationship almost at times became too close. There was a degree of credulity. I think that is the accusation. But I do think
Mr. Cameron was the first world leader to advocate getting involved in Libya, and he said today he thought it had been a good decision.
What is emerging now, despite years of repression and the trauma of recent months, I believe is impressive and encouraging. But I've never accepted the argument that because you can't do everything, you shouldn't do anything. Mr. Speaker, removing Gaddafi from power was a major achievement.
His MPs hope that won't turn out to be a hostage to fortune, but if the future is uncertain, the past is indisputably uncomfortable. Human rights activists sifting through the office once occupied by Musa Kusa in Tripoli say we definitely went too far.
They knew they were sending people back to Libya to be tortured. And of course we understand that the British government and the American government wanted to break down these Islamist networks, but it didn't really require them to get into bed with people like Musa Kusa.
The Foreign Office here has just dispatched our new ambassador to Libya off to Tripoli, and given that the UK was the first country to support the rebels, you might think he'd be welcomed with open arms. But the revelations of the past few days may make things a little more complicated than that. Tom Bradby, ITV News, at the Foreign Office in London.
In Libya, rebel forces have been massing around a pro-Gaddafi town that is refusing to surrender. But they're holding off from a final assault. Gaddafi is thought to have been in Beni Walid recently. The town is 100 miles from Tripoli, but it's home to 70,000 people. And the rebels want to avoid a massacre, as they told our international editor, Bill Neely.
The big guns and the young rebels are moving forward again.
One's for you,
But this is a show of force. They're heading for a town they don't want to attack, the Gaddafi stronghold of Beni Walid, which is defying deadlines to surrender, inviting a battle. We followed the rebels across the desert, closer to the town, but they stop well short. The circle around it is tightening, but Gaddafi's men won't go. Talks with them failed. The chief negotiator, a doctor who lived in Britain for 10 years. Gaddafi's men want to fight?
Yes.
How strong are they?
We don't know too much, but we know the estimation it's about 60 to 100 die-hard, but they have low ranks and volunteers with them.
So hardcore, dangerous people?
Yes, 100, maybe 100 people.
And you are worried about what? A massacre?
We are worried about massacre of the civilian of the city.
It's a victory chant, but they know they have no victory while 70,000 people remain trapped, many of them families of the rebels. Thank you very much. Their overall commander here told me that's exactly what's stopping them attacking. We're not afraid of Gaddafi's men, he says, just that they'll use civilians as human shields.
We gave him enough chances. And now, do or die. Come out and face the consequence, you silly bugger!
He is from East Sussex. Words are easy, but many here are uneasy. Gaddafi's men massacred townspeople in May. The hardcore might repeat it. The revolution may appear to be won, but as long as roads like this and the town at the end of it remain in Gaddafi's hands, these rebels worry that somehow the regime could hold out and even return. There is a stalemate in 3 towns, and the revolution isn't over. Not here. Somewhere in the desert, Gaddafi is fleeing. The sun has set on his rule, but the rebels still don't rule all of Libya yet.
And Bill is back in Tripoli tonight. So, Bill, first on the military situation, what are the prospects for ending the stalemate you've described there?
Well, the rebels have imposed a deadline for these 3 towns to surrender, and that's Saturday. But the loyalists of Beni Walid have made it quite clear that they're not going to do that, and they've already defied a previous deadline. Now, the rebels are going to have to make good on these threats, or they will lose credibility, and there's a risk of that happening because they've already lost credibility by the National Transitional Council, that's the effective government, not coming to Tripoli this week as they said they would. That looks weak, it looks hesitant, so the rebels are in a bit of a bind.
Right, and on this intelligence issue, Bill, can we expect to see more damaging revelations?
I think so. Most of the documents were recovered from the office of Musa Kusa, the intelligence chief. I know there were 2 large files relating to MI6, 1 file relating to the CIA, both in English, but dozens of files in Arabic all over offices in his building. So it's simply inconceivable that there isn't anything in there that would further embarrass the West, especially Britain, because it was Britain that brought Gaddafi in from the cold. It is Britain, perhaps, that has most to lose and most to be embarrassed about.
All right, Bill, thank you very much indeed.
Here, the alarm bells about a double-dip recession rang a little louder today after a new survey suggested a slowdown in the UK's service industries. Services now make up 3/4 of our economy, but the managers who decide the level we'll need in the next few months are predicting the biggest drop for a decade. Our business editor, Laura Kunsberg, went to a stormy Brighton to assess their economic forecast.
Wave after wave crashing onto the beach at Brighton, as a tide of worrying evidence suggests many companies are hanging on for dear life. With a worse than expected hit on the biggest part of our economy, our hopes of it getting back on its feet just being swept away. More than most, Brighton relies on the service economy, not just its hotels and pubs, but professionals like this digital design agency. They've been doing well, even taking on new staff. But one of its founders told me they are being squeezed again.
We could be winning more work, we could be doing more work. However, we have to be cautious that we don't overextend ourselves, because a commitment to spend from one of our clients as it used to be isn't the same as it is today, and we have to be very cautious until the ink's dry.
Companies' fears are clear. Growth in the service industries has had its biggest drop since 2001. That matters because it's by far the biggest part of our whole economy, making up 77%. And that's worth just over £1 trillion a year, around 10 times the budget of the NHS. There never was going to be a roaring return to the good times, but today's figures suggest the biggest chunk of our economy is finding it harder than expected. Companies here and around the country face an uncertain future. Even Brighton's famous pier is up for sale. It's still too early to say if we're heading for another crash, but perhaps the time of steady, if sluggish, growth could be coming to an end.
The volume of business, the number of new orders that are coming in and so forth, seems to be holding its own in a fairly flat economy. The change that's happening at the moment is that the spend of those customers is going down. The amount of money they're actually prepared to commit to whatever it is they're buying is going down, and that's where people do feel the pinch, if anything.
And the current turmoil that's reaching right across Europe's adding pressure too. Strong currents could make it harder for British companies to stay afloat.
And it has been another stormy day for stock markets here and in Europe. They were hit by more worries about Eurozone countries not repaying their debts. Here, the FTSE 100 fell by 3.6%. That was £49 billion wiped off the value of shares today alone. Shares in Paris went down 4.7%. Germany's DAX index fared even worse, falling by 5.3%, while the Dow Jones dropped more than 2%. Laura Koonsberg joins us in the studio now. And it's the latest in a sort of drip of bad news, isn't it? But the reaction of the markets would really seem to indicate just how fragile, how nervous they are.
Yes, Mary, and if you like, the markets do the job of capturing that anxiety. And it has been another day where there's been red across traders' screens in different countries, where the markets have tumbled really quite dramatically. Now, it's in part because of that worrying evidence from the service sector, that huge sector around Europe really struggling. But it's also because of bubbling up fears again about what's happening in the Eurozone. Now, the banks bore the brunt of the drops today across share markets around the world, but there are real concerns rising up once again about Italy, about Spain, about those countries, and about whether or not they're just looking at debts that they will not be able to deal with. But the kind of swings that we've seen today almost feel to be happening more and more. Perhaps we're moving to a situation where this kind of volatility is the new normal. And it'll be fascinating to hear what George Osborne has to say on the subject after his summer holidays. He's making a big speech tomorrow night, and it's certainly not the kind of circumstances he would have chosen to return to.
All right, Laura, thank you.
There's much more still to come on the programme, including a look at tomorrow's front pages. Plus, 10 years on from 9/11, how successful has America been in battling Al-Qaeda?
The end of Fortress Wapping. News International announces plans to sell off the site that changed the face of Britain's newspaper industry.
And Mo's medals, he does have 2. Is this the sign of Olympic glory to come? The spectre of famine and death has spread still further across Eastern Africa. The United Nations today raised its estimate of those facing imminent starvation in Somalia to 750,000. It says hundreds of people are still dying every day. Our Africa correspondent Rohit Kashru reports.
These are images from a crisis which is spreading. Images captured by ITV News in the 7 weeks since famine was declared. Refugees on the move. But today people are fleeing in even greater numbers. Children suffering from starvation. But if anything, the suffering has grown since. The UN says the scope of the famine in Somalia has expanded. Today it added the country's Bay region to the area in crisis, meaning 6 regions are now officially famine areas. 4 million people are now affected by drought and starvation in the country. That's half the population. 750,000 are at risk of dying. And yet the grim set of new statistics suggests that the peak of this crisis has not yet been reached.
I think that what we're reporting is a continued deterioration in the situation in Somalia. This is the most serious harvest failure that Somalia has had in 17 years.
There are other growing problems too, like fresh outbreaks of measles affecting victims with immune systems eroded by malnutrition. Some groups which have tried to help have found that elsewhere many cannot be reached. After all, it's some of the most dangerous, least accessible places where famine's grip has tightened. But famines rarely happen in peaceful nations. Rain this autumn won't be enough if violence continues. And although money might not be the only answer, the UN says much more of it is still needed. Rohit Katru, ITV News.
Almost 10 years to the day since the terrorist attacks of 9/11, there was evidence today that the fight against the Al-Qaeda network goes on. A man described as one of its leaders and said to have been plotting attacks against American targets has been arrested in Pakistan. In the first of a series of reports building up to the anniversary of 9/11, our Washington correspondent Robert Moore examines the fight against Al-Qaeda 10 years on.
Send every available ambulance, everything you got to World Trade Center now.
It was the ultimate surprise attack. The enemy was a group of fanatics that most Americans had never even heard of.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
An atrocity planned in a distant nation New Yorkers knew little about.
Mr. Bush's administration...
Michael Scheuer is an ex-CIA officer who was in charge of the hunt for bin Laden. 10 years on, he says the man he pursued for so long was the ultimate winner, by setting traps that America walked straight into, both in Iraq and Afghanistan.
They know us far better than we know them. Bin Laden knew we didn't have patience. He knew we couldn't stand casualties. He knew prolonged wars cause dissent in the United States, and all of those things have come true.
But large numbers of Al-Qaeda operatives and many of its leaders have been killed. Perhaps most importantly, America has taken the fight to the enemy. There is no longer complacency. Looking back 10 years, as we requested some former decision makers to do, it's clear how naive, how stunningly unprepared America was that September morning. So unprepared, even those closest to the president completely misunderstood events.
Our collective response was, oh, what a horrible accident. The pilot must have had a heart attack or something.
The second plane changed everything. White House Chief of Staff Andrew Card stepped forward into that Florida classroom and uttered words he will never forget.
And I leaned over and I whispered into his right ear, a second plane hit the second tower. America is under attack.
There's no guidebook, there's no roadmap, there's no plan.
This tremendous explosion as it hit the Pentagon.
Former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld was at the center of America's response, carrying a stretcher that day, fighting policy battles for years afterwards. And remarkably, he told me that he now believes 9/11 was a valuable wake-up call to a sleeping superpower.
There is no question but that it was a warning, and there's no question but that it could have been much more severe, and no question but that it might someday be much more severe.
So does Al-Qaeda remain a credible threat to the West? Absolutely, says the man who hunted its leader. Since 9/11, it has already spread like a contagion across the region.
From just being in Afghanistan as a large operating base to remaining in part of that country, Pakistan, Somalia, Yemen, Iraq, Palestine, North Africa.
The assault was an ambush on this nation's optimism and self-confidence. There may be future attacks, but never again will America be as vulnerable, as exposed, as it was a decade ago. Robert Moore, ITV News, New York.
The inquest into the death of the gunman Raoul Moat, who shot himself after a week-long standoff with police, has been played a 999 call he made. He phoned the police after shooting and injuring his ex-girlfriend and killing her new boyfriend, who Moat wrongly believed to be a police officer.
This is the gunman from Berkeley last night. My name is Raoul Moat. What I'm phoning about is to tell you exactly why I've done what I've done, right? Now, my girlfriend has been having an affair behind my back with one of your officers, this gentleman that I shot last night, the karate instructor.
A bitter argument broke out today over plans by the government to reform planning laws in England. Ministers said they won't back down on reducing red tape to make it easier for businesses to build. But the idea has been attacked by, among others, the National Trust, which called it fundamentally wrong. From Kent, Daisy McAndrew reports.
Woe betide any politician, let alone a Tory, who wants to build on these green